Okay, everyone. So we start this new session. So I see that the number of participants is decreasing. I think that it's becoming harder and harder. And thank you for everybody's remaining. Today, Arnaud will be there to help if necessary. So we'll go through. We'll continue the variational quantum algorithm tutorial that we started yesterday. And by doing that, we will go to Candela Cloud just to go through the different features of the Candela Cloud. We'll create some tokens and we'll make see how we can make some remote computing. Then we will start the last part of this class, which is defining an algorithm, real-life algorithm that will be shortest path finding and using a QUBO approach. So this will kind of put together everything that we have seen so far. And this will be the last part of this class. Probably we'll finish that tomorrow. And I remind you that for the one who want, tomorrow we'll have also a quiz, online quiz, that will allow you to get a certificate for attending the full training of Perceval with Candela and Quiz Center. So I will just remind very quickly where we stopped, what we did yesterday. I will remind what we found in the presentation about variational quantum algorithm. So let me share my screen. Okay. So just very quickly what we went through yesterday. So we went through this presentation. We discussed the fact that it was variational algorithm were a very interesting near-term algorithm for quantum. The type of algorithm that we can run today and having some results. That's because they are resistant to noise, because they scale well, and they have some features that are very nice. Potentially the ability to extend current machine learning tools with the ability to detect weak signals or faster convergence. So especially we want to one specific type of variational algorithm for photonic based on this design. We explain why it was important and what it was very promising. And this is what we'll be implementing today. We discussed quickly about one special type of variational algorithm, which is a VQE, a variational quantum eigensolver, where the expectation value that we measure is built to be the energy of a system, and so that we can solve some chemical type of problem or other type of problem, like we discussed the ability to map, for instance, mechanical problem to a VQE formulation. So we saw that there were multiple applications for VQE, but more globally, we are interested in VQA, and because one of the issues with VQE is that it's quite hard to implement and specific Hamiltonian due to the decomposition of Hamiltonian into gates. While for globally variational quantum algorithm do not need to have a specific formulation of Hamiltonian, and we can map any problem without really formalizing what is the shape of the quantum circuit. So we saw the equivalent with Qiskit. We quickly went through how to define that also using PennyLane with very neat combination of quantum nodes and classical nodes in formulation. And we stopped there. We moved to notebooks. So I will switch to the notebooks. Okay, so we switched to the notebooks, to three notebooks. We started with Qiskit notebooks, where the point was to define VQC, quantum VQC, using the machine learning extension of Qiskit. We used for that a preparation circuit, state preparation circuit, looking like that, and that's very classical, and that's looking like that. And then we made the classification with some mitigated results there. We saw that the way Qiskit was integrating that was very simple and meant to map basically the scikit-learn syntax. So you train VQC on the same way that you train a VQC SVC on Qiskit, as we saw on scikit-learn, as we saw here. So in 2 lines, you can train the system by just providing training and testing features. So this was the Qiskit side. We did the same with PennyLane. So we installed everything necessary for PennyLane. We saw state preparation following a slightly different logic based on some state preparation paper that was described here, where the features were mapped to rotation angles. So we saw that it was correctly working, and then we defined layers that were CNOT and rotation layers, exactly as what was done in Qiskit. And we trained the same way a classifier. The only point we saw on our way is that the dataset that was used by this notebook was a simplified version of the full dataset that was the IRIS dataset. So with only 2 classes, and the 2 classes were the simplest one. Where linear separation is very easy. So we can see that we can draw lines to separate all of this data very simply without any ambiguity. And based on this simplified data set, we saw that the QNN that was defined in this block, so where we have the state preparation, we have the layers that makes the ansatz, that is using the weights that we want to train, with expectation value on the policy basis. Then we saw that using this hybrid neural network, the algorithm was converging very fast to 100% accuracy, and managing to separate very clearly the two regions of the space. Again, it's not the problem was so easy that it's not that surprising that we reach 100% accuracy. And what will be interesting is to redo the same with the full IRIS dataset that Qiskit machine learning toolkit is using. Again, the point is not really to compare the different framework in terms of accuracy, but it's more to compare how the different framework implement this classification. And what is remarkable with PennyLane is the very simple and elegant definition of the prem through these quantum nodes and the classical nodes joined together. And we stopped at when we wanted to implement that in Perceval. So before moving to Perceval, I will just make some introduction on Candela Cloud, where normally you have all created an account, and we have granted you some credits to use some large-scale GPU simulator. So I will show you, I will give you a short tour of the Candela Cloud, so that if you want to try on your side, you have some idea on what are the different parts of the platform. So first, when you connect to Candela Cloud, so you have this small box on the bottom that gives you the availability of the different platform. So we can see, for instance, that QPU Scala, which is the one that you are interested in, and is the largest processor unit that you have so far. You see that availability in the last days has been a bit fluctuating. Especially yesterday, we saw that there was half a day availability due to some maintenance. And there is other simulator for QPU, for instance, Arcana, that has been deprecated, so this one is not available anymore. We have simulators that are 100% available. So when you go there, you have an idea of availability, and for us, it's important to show this availability because making quantum system is hard, but making a quantum system available 100% of the time is even harder. And we believe that the quantum industry must focus on this availability because if our computer are not available, we won't be able to implement algorithm, we won't be able to have day-to-day application. So I will just go give you a very quick tour on the Candela Cloud. You can on your side do the same if you want, and go through your own interface. Just need to connect. Okay, so when you arrive to the home page of Candela Cloud, it's the dashboard, or where you see the different activities and the different metrics of your platform and your environment. Not the support button that you have here. If you have any issue using Candela Cloud, feel free to send a message or question or whatever, and we try to almost answer to any question we get very quickly. So feel free to use this feature, and it's the very easiest way to communicate with the team behind Candela Cloud. Yeah. So on the Candela Cloud, you have different elements that you can see. You have jobs, it is what we'll be launching. Tokens, it is the way to access the platform that you have online. So here it's the token I have. The platform are the backend, either the simulator or the QPU. You have again the availability chart that you can look at. That is kind of a commitment that we give. There is also some time of the is used for calibration. So you see that especially yesterday we had 56.3% of the time that was in calibration, so manual calibration. Normally in a normal day there is automatic calibration that is running about 20% of the time, just to make sure that the platform is at the highest level of availability. And of course, if you look at the simulator don't have any maintenance because simulator don't need any maintenance. Then you have the list of the platform. You should be able to see something like QPU Scala, Simulator Scala. This list depends on your credentials. So this is what I see. On your side, you should see at least QPScaler, SimScaler, and probably one of the two first, a simulator running on 2V 100 GPU card, or one single. So when you connect to one platform, again, you have the availability of the platform. And you have also parameters that you can use within Perceval as kind of additional features to control the QPU. For instance, we talked a lot about PNR, which is one of the very important feature when we make some quantum circuits. And in today notebook, we'll be implementing our own pseudo PNR. But you have a built-in pseudo PNR inside the platform where the modes 0 and 1 and 2, so there is 3 modes where you have access to physical pseudo PNR. And how it works that after your photonic chip, there is a beam splitter, physical beam splitter, and each of the output mode of the 3 first output mode is connected to 2 detectors and not only one, so that we have the ability to detect 0, 1 or more photon with a probability of 50%. There is 50% of chance that we detect that there has been more than one photon in a given mode, which is already good enough for some algorithm, in particular a variation algorithm. Then you have some characterization information. So the last characterization, so this is done every hour. So the last characterization, we see that we have a clock running at almost 80 megahertz. We have a HOM that is a bit low at 90%. A full end-to-end transmission that is around 2.5%, which is super low. So there's probably some issue maybe on the laser or something. So something that probably engineers will be looking at today. We have a G2. If you remember, the G2 is the value of the purity, is indicating the purity of the source, which is so 1% is very high. And we can run that on up to 6 photon on 12 mod. And more especially, you can see the photonic chip itself. So it is a 12 mod photonic chip here. So you have the design, and if you zoom in, you see also the name of the different parameters. So for instance, this phase shifter here is the phi 25. And you can individually control each of them, 504. Most of the time, you don't care about that because what you want to do is just to send a circuit, and the automatic compilation will compile your circuit to fit the chip. But for some specific type of algorithm, like the one that we'll be doing today, we'll be interested in giving specific value for each phase shifter so that we have a better control of the chip itself. So this is for the platform that you see here. You have access to notebooks that you can run directly from your cloud environment. And when you launch some jobs, you have the ability to look at the job and to see the status. So if you are running on the QPU, it's unlikely that they will be running on real time because the QPU is shared with a lot of users. So you will see the status that will be something like in progress. And then when the job is complete, you can look at the results here of the job. So most of the time, it's not really necessary to look there because it will be done through Perceval, but it also gives you some information that you can directly access. So for instance, if I'm looking at this specific job that was run, when it was run, with my account 2 weeks ago. So this one is not interesting because there is zero shot. I will take this one. So this one was run, yes, 2 weeks ago on my account. There was 200,000 shots. The platform here is a simulator Scala. The job has been running as completed. And if I look at the job itself, I see that so my job run on the simulator. It was a two mode circuit. I cannot see the circuit. The circuit is there, and you cannot visualize the circuit today. So there will be a feature coming where you will be able to see the circuit here online, but you really care. So there was a circuit that was launched here with two photons with the latest version of Perceval. And then as the output, you see that there has been a distribution of three states, possible states, 1, 0, 0, 1, and 1, 1, with the count that we got out of that. We have a physical performance. The physical performance tells us how many shots were surviving with photons. So you know that we can have some loss. So 20% of the job of the time clock gets some photons, and 80% of the other jobs didn't get any photon out because of the loss in the circuit. It's just indicative, and it's kind of the way to understand in depth what is happening. So sometimes there might be some intermediate results. For instance, if you are running some job like VQE online, VQE will itself run a lot of different circuits, and then you will be able to see intermediate results while for instance, the intermediate energy before the end of the full process. So this is the tool you have. You can, when you use a lot the platform, sometimes it's interesting to filter by platform. So this is the last job I run on the QPU here. I know exactly which token was used. I can give a name to the job. So the job is either the name that is given by the automatically by Perceval, or you can give a nice name if you want. So you can go through very in-depth of all the job here. On my side, you see that I've been running something like 8,000 jobs on the QPU. Last but not least, there is a credit. So you have access to some credit. So today, access to the platform is for you. It's free for limited time, and you see the number of credits. So the credit will auto renew every month, and you see the number of credits you have available for running each job. So this is important in the future if you want to continue using Candela Cloud. We are providing free credit for academia. This is a way to monitor how much credit do you have remaining. And you can also see the type of job that were done on different platforms in the last month. Yeah. So you see on my side, if I look at, I run a lot of tasks on QPU in September, and since then I've been running more stuff like task on the simulator. Yeah. So this is your platform, and feel free to go through all the different points. If you have any question, issue, let us know. When you register, you have some. You indicate that you agree to receive some newsletter, and you can change your setting in your platform. If you don't want to receive any more newsletter, you can disable that. You are receiving also emails. When your job is complete, you're receiving automatically some emails in your mailbox. So it's easy when you are running something that takes very long, so that you can be notified when your job is over. Yeah, but you can disable all of that. So that's all for the tour. So for today, we'll be creating some token that we'll be using to run our our notebook today. So I will create a new token, class 10 token. You can change the priority of your token. So it depends on the type of account you have. So on my side, this account is a regular account, so I can only I have normal priority or low priority. If I was paying for the access to Candela Cloud, I would get also the ability to have high priority token, which is not the case here. And you can expire some tokens. So here, for instance, it will be expiring in 30 days, this token. So I will put my token here. And you will need to have one token to run your experiment. So either you did it or I will just share my token so that you can run the notebook on your side, even if you didn't have the time to create your own token. So I will give you access to my token. Or again, you can use your own, but in that case, you will be using mine. Okay, sharing token is a bad idea globally because when you share token, you don't have access to, you cannot even look at if you are not the owner of the token, you cannot look at the status of the job because you didn't launch the job yourself, someone else launched the job for you. So it's not a good idea to launch to share token. And if you are using some limited credits, then other people will be able to use the credit. So it's globally don't share your token. So this said, we'll move to this notebook. But before doing this notebook, I will just go through quickly a notebook where showing how to do remote computing. So it is one of the notebook that is available on Perceval documentation. So what I propose is that you check out Perceval if you have not done it already. Just go uh, to your notebook and we'll just check out uh, Perceval, all the Perceval repository. So I will show you another way to do that. You can open a terminal inside your notebook environment and you can just make git clone and Perceval. So I'm checking out Perceval from a terminal here. So we will see that it will appear here. So if you see that on my navigation, I now have a Perceval repository here. So you can do that in a terminal instead of doing that in the notebook as we were doing previously. If you already had done that in the previous class, because we already check out that, you can just pull. You can go to Perceval and you get git pull so that it will update your notebooks from the GitHub. So everything is synchronized here, so I can close that terminal. If you have any question, feel free to ask myself or Arnaud, who is available here for you. So before doing this notebook, I will just show you how we can do remote computing. So just go to Perceval documentation source notebooks. And this is where all the official notebooks of Perceval are. So I will go to remote computing and we'll go step by step in this notebook. Just that you see how we can run some job on the cloud on this very simple process. So we will be using in this notebook a Perceval, of course, and we're using sampler. If you remember, sampler is one of the simplest algorithms you have access to that just give you shots of from your backend simulator or QPU. It's very similar to the sampler that you have in Qiskit, for instance. So I'm defining a. Oh, I need to import install Perceval. Pip install Perceval. Candela. So yes, if you are using the notebook that you have been using for the beginning, since the beginning, you should not have this problem. On my side, I created an account yesterday, so I have to reinstall Perceval. Okay, so running it, restarting my notebook, and it's running. So I'm defining a very simple circuit. You recognize that this circuit is the simplest circuit we can do, which is MZI. MZI means Mach Zehnder interferometer. You have two beam splitter and the phase shifter. And the phase shifter is the full combination beam splitter, phase shifter, beam splitter is actually beam splitter. It's one of the things we saw in previous token. So here we will use token. So I will use one feature. So I will go through Candela Cloud and get my token here. And I need to put my token. So this is a neat feature in Perceval. So I've been saving my token, which means that I can relaunch my notebook and I don't need any more uh, to provide my token because my token is saved locally on my session. So I can run again and again, and you don't need to remember your token for the previous for the next iteration. So it's a bit like a safe provider that IBM is giving access to if you are familiar with Qiskit. So I see some questions, but I suppose that Arnaud is handling them. So I'm continuing. So here we'll be running some circuit. The circuit will be running on the simulator Scala. Scala. So when I'm running this, I'm connecting to the simulator to the cloud, and it's done. So that means that the communication went well. If I was trying to access to a non-existing simulator backend, it would show that it doesn't work. So this proves that we have access already to the cloud. This is working, the token is okay. If there was a typo in the token, this line would not work. Yeah. So if you run this line, that means that you are correctly connected to your own account. So doing that, I'm asking some specification of the platform. So here I'm connected to a QP simulator Scala. So let's break that in two parts. Up. First, I will look at the specs. Oh, there are the structure specs is there. Okay, so the spec is a JSON is a dictionary that gives you some information about all the specs of the platform. There is also the circuit itself that you can display here. So it takes a little bit of time because the circuit is large. So this is the Haskella circuit that is implemented and that of course the simulator is running. So it's the same. If we are connected on the QPU, we would be exactly the same for the chip. So let's just try that. I will display my specs. So you see the specs are a bit different. And so it's not really readable, but we can display them here. So we have the constraint, we have the parameters that you can change, final number, the number of modes that you want to keep, the detected photons, and the pseudo PNR. This feature is interesting. For instance, if you are running a circuit with 4 photons and you are only interested in 4 photon output, then you put a mean detected photon to 4. So that means that it won't send you back all the detection with only 2 or 3 or 1 photon. So this is an interesting feature. We can see also that you will get access to inside your block here. you have access to the performance of the system somewhere. I'm trying to read that. Uh, Actually, I don't see them. So I should be able to access the G2 HOM from there, but I don't see them here. So probably it's in a sub structure here that I don't have access to directly. Anyway, so let us go back to CMaScalar. Up, I'm displaying that, displaying the constraints. Then all the parameters you have access to can be set with set parameters. So here, for instance, we'll be simulating a noisy system. So we'll set a HOM, a limited transmittance of the system and the G2, and we'll be interested only in filtering state with only one photon. So sending that, I'm asking for 200 samples. I can give a job to my job. That will be easier for checking that sampling from use of the seminar. I define a sampler, and then this line executes my job. So there is two ways to execute a job. You can either execute synchronously. So synchronously means that you are waiting for the output, or asynchronously. And asynchronously will just create a job ID. I can go and look on the Candela cloud on jobs here. So you see that the job name that I've just declared is this one, sampling for Qcenter seminar, class 10 token. And my job is complete already. And there is a process ID here that allows to follow the job. So I can look at the result of my job here. So I see that I've been sending 2 photons, 200,000 click, and I have a distribution of probability here, which is something that I can access directly. And my process ID, my job ID is the same that I can see here. This one, you recognize the job ID here. So, and now I can make a loop and to wait for the success of the jobs, but the job was already finished, so it is already in success. And then I can retrieve the results here, so distribution of photon output. So I will be doing the same with QPU since it is available. So if you do that, it's okay, but you might need to wait for the result. So here I have the ability to estimate the number of shots that I will need to get 200,000 2-photon coincidence in QPScalar. I need, with the transmission of QPScalar today, 32 million shots. So it's a lot. So let us do that on 1,000 sample. So for 1,000 sample, I need 160 shots. So I will do that. This 161, 265. So it's an estimation. So it's just estimated by the system. Or let's say 10,000 here. I'm running my job on a QPU. It's asynchronous. So you see that it's not finished yet. We can go and see on the interface here. And we'll probably see the job. Yes, it is there, running on QPU, and it's already completed here. So my job is completed. Nobody was using the QPU, and I can get my results here out of my job. So you see that I've been making 10,000 shots here, and then I'm getting far less than 10,000 shots. I'm getting something like 1,000 sample, and it's just because the shot is the clock iteration, and the samples is when we get enough photon, at least one photon. So we have only 1,000 sample for 10,000 shots, and it is what was predicted here in the how many job sample I shot and had to do. So here it's showing you how to run a process on the GPU, on the QPU. You could do exactly the same on the GPU. So the only difference that you need to provide the name of the platform, GPU platform, and the name you can find it on the platform list. So for me, it will be this name. Yeah. Note that GPU are not allowing noisy simulation, so it will be always perfect simulation, and it will allow you to scale to 20, 24 photons without any prem. So you can scale up your algorithm with using GPU for testing. So that's all here. So I see a question or the comment. Arnaud, you are dealing with the chat, I suppose.
Yeah, it's all good. We just had one from Su Minho. And it's all
Okay. So that's all. So now we will be starting the tutorial from yesterday, the Perceval virtual classifier. So the goal of this tutorial is to implement this circuit that will be doing the iris classification that we have been looking at for Qiskit and PalyLane before. So we'll be looking at step by step how to do that in Perceval. So this notebook has been developed by Dario and Alexia. Dario and Alexia are researchers at Candela. They are not computer scientists. They are doing research in machine learning. And so they have implemented this notebook. You will see that this notebook is not super clean in terms of code. And it's a bit because it is made by a researcher, which is totally okay. But the idea is to understand how it works. So we'll implement this setup where, as we explained yesterday, with the two blocks, theta, where we store the weight of the circuit, x, where we store the features, and theta, where we store other weight that will be training. Note that we could have only one single block of theta. It is what they define, but we could easily only make one block theta, either the first or the second one. We need absolutely the X zone to put the features. There is no other way. And there is two other things that they have encoded. They have encoded also a block here to do pseudo PNR. So I will go through that quickly. And there is another set of parameters, which is theta. Theta is a linear transformation that's applying on the output distribution to fabricate the model output. So you know that I told you that one important thing when you are doing some classification or variation algorithm, at the end you get some probability distribution, and you need to turn this probability distribution into the thing you are interested in. It can be an energy, it can be a class, it can be something. So you need to have here a mapping between your output of the system and uh, your objective function, the one that on which you want to make some training. So in that case, they have put here a linear model layer that will map the probability distribution to the class of the object that we'll be looking at. So let's go to the different step. So first I will reinstall Perceval Candela, that is already there. I need to install also Scikit Optimize. There is a warning about pandas. Don't worry about that. And then I'm loading the different modules that I will be using. Perceval, NumPy, Matplotlib for display, Scikit Optimize for the optimization layer. I will get from scikit-learn the Iris dataset, so exactly as what was done in Qiskit, and some miscellaneous library. Yeah. So let us configure Perceval. Here in that notebook, there is something that we didn't saw earlier, is the ability to change the skin of the circuit. The skin is the way a circuit is displayed. So you remember we are seeing the circuit something like that with these red lines and the gray box. In this notebook, they have decided to use a symbolic skin, so you will see that it shows a different way to render the circuit. That is a bit nicer, in particular if you want to display to make some publication. It looks a bit more professional. So it's just a question of display rendering. So the first thing we'll be doing before going to the actual notebook, we'll be trying to implement that by hand. So let's how we can implement that by hand, and then after we'll see how Dario and Alexia have made that in this notebook. So we want to make the parameter encoding. So the way we'll be doing that is that we'll be making a block here. So here it is a 4x4 blocks generic interferometer. What does a generic interferometer means? It means that it's a universal matrix, a universal circuit, where it has enough parameters to encode any circuit. So it can be either a triangular shape, what we call the rect design, this one, or the rectangle shape that we call the Clemens design in that case. Yeah. And each element of my generic interferometer here, so you see that we are alternating one element here, then one element here, one here. So it is a mesh of these different elements. And this is repeated n time and on n modes. So it is a square definition. So here I'm defining some generic interferometer that contains enough parameter to store, for instance, my weight. So W1, W2. So the actual shape of the circuit you define is depending on you. Generally, we take the Clemens interferometer. So the rectangle one. And we define here MZI as a minimal element. So what you see here is that we have defined a beam splitter. The element that will be repeated is this, which is just a beam splitter plus a phase shifter. So this is not a MZI. If we want the MZI, we need to add a new beam splitter at the output here. So that will be this. And we need to add another phase shifter that we call theta. This one we call theta A and theta B. So this is this circuit is MZI. What is my typo? Yes, that's my missing I. So I will do it a bit smaller on 4 modes only. So here you see the same. So it is a repetition of the pattern I put, but the pattern here is the MZI, is this block. So we have repeated this block 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4, 5, 6 times. And this makes the more universal type of circuit that you can make with on 4 modes. We can display, if you want, the unitary of W1. So it will take a little bit of time because this is a parameterized circuit. So since it is parameterized, that means that we can get the numeric value of the unitary. We can just compute the symbolic one, and you see that the expression is quite complex with all the phase that are mixing and combining into this 4x4 matrix. So this is our building block. So I define in W1 that will be this one. W2 that will be this one. This one will be SX, and this one will be PNR. So let us do that. So yes, you can change triangle. It is what we made. You can put MZI. It is what we made. This is MZI. Okay. So this is where the weight of the system will be. So on this phi here, theta A0, theta B0, theta 1, theta B1, and so on. Now we'll be storing the data itself. So for that, we just use what you call a phase shifter column, which is simply that. So x0, x1, x2, x3, it's a 4 parameters. So it's my circuit's 8 is 4. So it's only 4 modes. And I'm able to store here 4 parameters. It will be the parameters of my SX. You remember in the slide X, there was the W1, W2, SX block. And then I want to make a block where I will be detecting, be able to detect photons. So again, why and what is pseudo PNR? PNR detectors are detectors that allow us to know exactly the number of photons we get in each output mode. So physically, physical PNR are very hard to do. So there is more and more vendors that provide some solution, like for instance, a single quantum, quantum opus, ID Quantic. They start having some out-of-the-shelf solution for PNR, but it's still a kind of early feature. So most of the time in laboratory, you see people using threshold detectors, and threshold detector, we are only able to detect if 1 photon or more is coming, but we don't know how many photons exactly are coming. So we can build a pseudo PNR, and pseudo PNR is very simple. In fact, what we'll be doing is that if we have 2 photons in one mode, then we'll be dispatching this photon in 2 modes. What is mistake here? So let us do that step by step. Here, what we'll be doing is that we'll be using a circuit pseudo PNR, which is a simple beta. So we'll be using only this component, and the idea is that if you send 2 photons in the first mode and you don't send any photon here, then the photon will not interfere. In the output, they will just independently be dispatched on each mode. So there is 50% of the chance that the first photon goes in the upper mode, 50% of the chance that the photon goes in the lower mode, and the same for the second photon. So that means that if we look at the complete distribution, and it is what you have been doing here, we have, when we are sending 2 photons in the first mode, 0 in the second mode, we have 50% of chance that the photons are dispatched in 2 different modes, 1, and we have 50% of chance that the photons are bunching again in one of the different modes. But it's already a progress. We started with 2 photon bunch. So bunching means that they are going in the same mode. we started with two photon bunch in the same mode, and now we have 50% of the chance that we can differentiate the two photons in one of the detector. So that means that we have a 50% probability pseudo PNR implemented. So if you want to do that on N mode and not only on 2 mode, then we'll be doing something like that. So it's not super readable, but let us look at what we have. So let us suppose that the output of our circuits are the first 3 modes here. So what basically what we are doing is that we are sending the first mode of the circuit to a Bills filter. 4, 5, 6, and 7 are just ancilla mode where there won't be any photon. So here there is one pseudo PNR for the first mode, and the same for the second mode. The second mode is going to this beam filter, coming with ancilla photons here. So there is pseudo PNR here, pseudo PNR for the second mode, and pseudo PNR for the last mode. So by doing that, we have turned the four mode circuit into an 8 mode circuit. And with this circuit, we have the ability to do pseudo PNR, to have more detection of photons. So, which is interesting. If you think about what we did, if we had not done that, then the number of output state will be limited to state where there's only 0, 1 photon in each mode on 4 modes. Now we have projected that into 8 mode with 0, 1 photon in each mode. So we immediately see that we have increased the size of our space, of search space, where roughly we had 16 possible outputs before doing pseudo-PNR, and now we have 2 power 8, which means 256 possible output using my pseudo-PNR. So I've just increased the size of my output space by doing that. Of course, it's not enough because we have still case where there is some bunching of photons, but we could continue doing that, and we could put a second layer of beam splitter here that will just multiply by 2 again my number of output modes. Physically, I cannot do that if I'm working on 4 mode chip because I have only 12 modes available on my chip. So I cannot add 16 layers, 16 output modes from pseudo-PNR. They don't fit in my chip. So here, this is my block pseudo-PNR here. So you understand now why my pseudo-PNR is bigger than my layer before here, because I added this additional mode. And then I'm putting everything together in my QPC. And I can display my circuit like that, or I can display it by blocks, by looking at what is inside the blocks here. It's a bit nicer. Something to note here is that it's not symmetric. So we are turning the 0 to 3 index mode into 0 to 8. Just to being a bit nicer, we could have put the circuit at the middle. So we could have used the mode 2 to 5 and just modify the permutation here so that we have the pseudo-PNR that extends symmetrically above and lower using the upper and lower modes. Yeah, it is what Alexia and Dario have been doing. You see that the circuit is in the middle, and they are extending the circuit with pseudo PNR layers at the top and at the bottom here. Okay, so we are ready, and in this preparation, so we have made the circuit we wanted, but what we'll be doing is a bit different. We'll be using the low-level implementation that Dario and Alexia have been preparing, and I will explain why just after. First, I wanted to show you we can display the unitary of the circuit, so it will take a bit of time because it's all symbolic computation on this unitary. I should have put a smaller n, but you will see the unitary shape. Okay. So I think that we are on the same server, so we are using the same resource all together here. So it's take the thing a bit longer. So what I propose in any case is that we make a few minute breaks, 3-minute breaks, and we'll restart just after the break. And then we'll go through the actual implementation and the classification using what we just, the IDs that we just implemented here. So let us switch stop for 3 minutes, and we'll be back right away, and the calculation will be complete then.
네, 3분간 휴식 취하고 바로 다음 단계 진행하겠습니다.
Okay, let us start again. So I relaunched the calculation of unitary if only 3 n equal 3 because it was taking too much time. And you can see the shape of your unitary, which is monstrous. So it's not really, there is nothing to for us to understand here. So it's making a lot of computation. So there is some simplification here on this mode because it's the mode where we had this extra permutation for the pseudo-PNR. But otherwise, it's not readable. And what we are interested in, as I was explaining yesterday, we could do this virtually using this virtual circuit. But if we do that, we don't take into account the fact that you have a physical circuit in Haskella, a physical circuit where each phase shifter is actually a piece of material that we are eating when you are changing the phase of the phase shifter. So on Haskella, all this blue box that you see, the small blue box that you see, are actually physical it's mini heaters that change the index, the propagation in the index of the light inside the material. So what we want when we are doing this type of VQC, we want to benefit from these features. So instead of using these virtual parameters that are just numbers that multiply together, will be after going to some phase shifter, but there won't be one-to-one mapping. For instance, the theta A0 will end up somewhere being implemented in the combination of multiple phase shifter here, which is what you can see. If you look at where there is a theta A0, the theta A0 is modifying almost all of your cells of your matrix, which means that these virtual parameters don't have any physical mapping. They are just diffused in the complete chip. So what Alexia and Dario have been doing, they have been programming the chip manually at the lowest level, just by switching the phase shifter as they want. And doing that, they benefit from the actual parameters and physical parameters of the chip. So we'll be doing that. So let us start. So first, there is again asking the token. So I told you earlier that we don't need the token. But show you if you want to put the token, because the way they will be making the request will be passing the token to the remote processor here. So this is the manual way. So let us do that. You don't need that, as we said that earlier, because we could simply not give the token anymore. But in that notebook, I will be doing that. So it's an alternate way of doing QP token. Yeah. Okay. So I've given my token. Make sure that you are not running the circuit on QPU because it will take more than 1 hour to run each of us. So if we all run it, it will just take all the QPU time. So we are running that on simulator. I will go through the complete notebook and then I will come back and step. So they have this huge quantum classifier class. So if you look at the code itself, it looks a bit unreadable. So we try to decipher what it is actually doing. Then they are defining the object quantum classifier on the dataset Iris, exactly the same one that we have been using for Qiskit. So this time there's no in some way, it is the same. So okay. Displaying the circuit of the classifier. So the circuit of classifier is actually the circuit of Haskella because we are running that on Haskella. So no surprise. Here I have the full Haskella circuit. But you see something that is a bit specific, is that you have some preset value for some of the phase shifter. And I will try to explain why we have that. So we have the circuit, and now we are launching the simulation end-to-end. So again, I will go and step by step, we'll try to understand what has been done behind the scene. Yeah. So here it is displaying, so it's not a nice visualization as you had in Qiskit. It's just showing the value step by step here. And it gives us for each iteration for 100 data points. So you remember that there is 150 data points in the training set. So they have decided to take 100 for the training and 50 for the evaluation, I think. It is split. Okay, so it's going on. So one feature that is being used in that notebook that is very interesting is the what you call the batch feature. So you know that for for calculating the objective function at the end here, at the output of your circuit, you need to evaluate the outcome of your circuit for each of the data points. So we have 100 data points. That means that there should be 100 requests on the cloud for each iteration. So they are not doing that. They are using a batch mode where they are able to send the same circuit and asking for 100 different measurements so that there is only one request on the cloud. And it is on the cloud that the request is split into 100 tasks, and 100 tasks are run on the simulator itself. So we see that it's going on quite well. Okay, and it's only 10 iteration, and we have accuracy of 98%, which is quite nice. So, and you see that the objective function is decreasing here correctly. So they will be evaluating that. So to do the evaluation, they are running that also. I was not complete yet on the iteration before. So still waiting the first one to continue. Oh no, I launched it again, sorry. So something interesting is that we have a stochastic process, meaning that every time you are doing the optimization, it won't give you exactly the same result. So from one evaluation to another evaluation, you might get some different result, and probably on your side, you have not exactly the same result than mine. So, okay, I think this will be done this time. How many iterations there should be? 15, okay, so let's wait for 15 iteration. Okay, and then I made the evaluation. The evaluation is running the test data set on the simulator the same way, and is calculating the accuracy. So my test set accuracy is 95%, which is quite good, and I can display plot what you call the confusion matrix. So we saw that there is the confusion means that there is a mistake here. So you see that the predicted there is a confusion between 0 and 1, and 2 is always no, there is confusion between 1 and 2. That become 2 becomes 1 and 1 becomes 0. Yeah. So this is the confusion we have, which is not that surprising again, because you remember the data set, the point for 1 and 2 were totally mixed here. So here there is a confusion between these two classes, and we kind of expected that by just looking at the data. So there is this confusion matrix here, and I can also plot the distribution of the data points, so what you call the class estimator. So my objective function will be valued between -1 and 1, and they will be dispatched linearly between -1 and 1 with 3 areas where we define what is below this line is the class 0, what is below this line is class 1, and what is higher than this line is class 2. This is the class estimator that was defined. Okay, and then you can also do that with some additional this on the train set, and we do the same on the test set. So yes, this confusion matrix on the trade set, and on the test set, we see basically again the same. There is one mistake here on the class 2, which is confused to be class 1 here. And we have the same distribution on the test set. So we understand that the last part, let us try to understand how this was actually implemented. So what we can take out from that is that this noisy simulation is already giving some quite interesting results if we compare to the very basic method that was done in Qiskit. So of course we could have improved the Qiskit implementation by making a different type of state preparation and that. But here we are just giving some quite good classification by default. So you see the point, we can see the point that are wrongly classified, this one, and this one here. So we see that they are between the different zones. So let us look quickly at the code. I won't go into too much detail because we kind of understood the gist with this circuit. The circuit was to, the idea was to implement that circuit on the chip. But doing that physically. What it means physically? Physically, it means that we will set up the phase, different phase of the circuits by hand to try to control directly, to use directly the fact that we are using physical phase shifter. So for instance, here we see which are the phase that will be the phase used by the theta, the weight, and which are the phase that will be used by the data. So let us look at the chip itself. So for instance, 214 and 37. So 214. So if we look at the chip itself, no, here we don't have the name. The name, you need to go on the platform. You need to go to Haskella here. And here you can have access to the different phase. You see the phase. So we see that the 2, 4, so 2, 4, 6 are used by the theta. 0 is not used, and we see why. And there was, for instance, the 37 that was used for the data. So 37, 39 probably is used by the data. Let's look back at the code. The code was giving us 37, 39, 47, 49. So this 37, 49, 47, 49. So these 4 phases here are used by the data. This phase here on the left are used by the theta, and so on. So here they made a manual mapping of the different phase to their function. There is also the fixed phase. So the fixed phase, let's look at the function itself. Fixed phase, they are giving some specific value of different phase of the circuit. For instance, the phi 6 will be pi. So let's look at what phi 6 is to try to understand why they did that. So phi 6 here is pi. And probably if we look, there will be phi 28 and phi 8 and so on. Why they are doing that? They are doing that because we will be sending photons in the 3 modes here, and we want the photon to be confined in the 6 modes that are here. So for the photon to be confined in that kind of corridor here, the blue corridor, we need to make sure that no photon will go at the bottom of the chip or at the top of the chip. And to do that, we simply need to turn the reflexivity of all the beam splitter that will allow photon to leak on the bottom to full reflexivity. So that means that when the photon will try to go to a beam splitter here, it will be reflected and stay in the area. So This has been done on the top line, on the bottom line, so that we know that the photon will remain in this area. So it's again they are manually hard coding the phase shifter to implement the path of the photon in the circuit. So we understand this part, the fixed phase. There is one more thing that I want to show you is the pseudo-planar. So here they will be they have implemented the pseudo-planar layers. So for that they are using this phase. So there is 4 Bilfilter that are put to pi/2. So let's look where the phase 100 is. Phase 100 will be very far here, and it will be this one. So they have put this Bilfilter in mode pi/2, meaning that this Bilfilter will become will just implement a pseudo-planar photon splitting as we made manually in the circuit. And they have dedicated 4 Bilfilter to be pi/2. That means that they have they will be acting as pseudo-planar, and this is to implement what they have made here, this area. So they will be using all these modes here to as photon detection, while they have only 3 photons in the output. So here they have implemented pseudo-planar manually. Okay, so this is this ugly part of the code here, fixed phase. So there is code after to map the output, because if they detect a 1-1, it will mean that it was the 0-2, basically. So this means that every time they detect a 1-1, it means that it was a 2 photon in this mode. Every time they detect 1-1, for instance, here, it means that there is 2 photons in this mode. So here they are undoing the PNR manually by just putting back the photon together. So this is done. It's not nice code. It's a very ugly code that is manually, but we see the intent here. Okay, this is done. I just want to show you the last part is where is the class prediction function. The cost estimator. So for the cost estimator, they are using accuracy code between trained and predicted, and the accuracy code score is coming from where is the accuracy score is coming from? I think it's coming from scikit-learn metrics. So it's just the accuracy. So their objective function is just the distance between the predicted class and the actual reference class, which is just the accuracy, how much of the class has been correctly classified. Okay, so we see the different function that we saw in Qiskit. So we see how to map the feature. We see the ansatz. The big difference here is the ansatz has been set manually. The feature mapping has been done manually on the circuit. We see that the objective function is just the accuracy, while for PennyLane it was the square loss. So it's totally depending on it's up to you when you define this. They're using an optimizer that is a scikit-learn optimizer. So I don't know exactly the details of this optimizer, which is GP. It's one of the optimizer you can find. And then the main function will always be the same. We get the data point, we optimize the parameters, and then we start again. So the core of the function itself is always very simple each time. We have the cost estimator optimizing the parameters, and then start again for each iteration. So we recognize the global pattern here. So I'm coming back this kind of ends this comparison. I just wrapping up that in PowerPoint to make some conclusion on these three experiments. So give me 1 second. Okay, so we did that. We tried notebooks. We did Penny Lane, Qiskit, and Perceval side by side. So really different. So kind of the conclusion for this training session. So first, again, just keep in mind that variational algorithms are really playing an important role in this area. They are most of the algorithms we can think of today are variational. So the last one we'll see using Kubo will also be variational. It will be slightly different, but it will be variational. So it's really very important in this era to use variational algorithm. It's kind of the main thing we have today. There is different framework that allows to do that. PNN is super elegant. You can combine quantum node, classical node together. So it's not the only one. Keep in mind that Qiskit machine learning has also the same feature. And there is no magic, in fact. Whatever you do, so if you are using Penny Lane with IBM backend, or if you are using IBM with IBM backend, you are doing exactly the same eventually. It's just the way to present the problem is simplified when you are using a framework like Penny Lane. There is no magic happening in the framework itself. And I wanted to show you the Perceval implementation because for Perceval we got quite a nice score immediately, so 95% classification. Just on the noisy simulator, so not on the hardware, but if you are running that on hardware, you will get the same. And we got this nice score because we used the specific of the hardware. We directly went to the hardware to use the detail. So for photonic, the thing again to remember is that the parameters that you are training against are physical. So it's really the parameters of the chip that are controlled by voltage on the control layer of the processor, that are turned into heat, into current in the chip. The current is producing some heat. The heat is changing the refractive index of the light inside the material, and then causing some phase shifting on the light. So here you are very concrete. Here you are touching the physics directly inside this low-level implementation. And this allows us some reliability, time-stable solution. So if you are trying your circuit today and trying again in 2 weeks, it will basically work the same because you are back to the same hardware with the same physical parameters that you can change, which is not the case in a quantum neural network that will be trained on other platform. There is definitely something that is tedious. You saw that to implement that, we had to look at the chip itself. We had to look at the phase position of each of the position of each of the phase. So it was really tedious to do that. And actually, it is Dario and Alexia started with doing this high-level implementation. Then when they wanted to get some additional performance, they went to the lower level. There is something missing if we look at the complete ecosystem of the framework. Here we had to go to the very low implementation and to name the phase. So we cannot imagine that we keep doing that if we have some chip with 1,000 phase shifter. It's not possible to think that manually we'll be implementing the value of the phase one by one. So probably we are missing some intermediate layer, some kind of abstraction layer that would allow the developer to implement a circuit very precisely, but not needing to name the different phase. It's like if you are trying to make some optimization code for a specific problem, and then you have to implement that in assembly language on your computer. Nobody's doing that anymore. So if you want to get performance, high performance, you go to, for instance, for Fortran, that is intermediate layer, or you are working with CUDA primitive if you are working on GPU, but you are not actually going to the physical primitive device primitive. So here we are probably missing some intermediate language. You know that other platform have something that is called QASM, which is kind of assembly language for quantum language. This has been defined for gate-based language, and this is an initiative that IBM started. That's now it's being followed by most of the community. There is no such a thing for photonic today. So today, there is no real intermediate language that we could use to program a photonic chip. One of the reasons is that the number of players behind is very small. So there is Candela for continuous variable. There is Xanadu for Candela for discrete variable, Xanadu for continuous variable, but there is no other players. So the community is so small that has not been any initiative for doing this assembly language, but at some point it will have to come. Last, my point on the variation algorithm on quantum neural network here is that there is no proof today that we can reach an advantage with quantum neural network. But there is a lot of strong clues. And if we look at Google Scholar, you will see that there is more than 1 million paper published on quantum machine learning today, which is huge. If you are looking for, I don't know, for boson sampling, for instance, you will get very small number. So the research community around quantum machine learning is huge. There is a lot of paper that shows some nice features, for instance, that we can train better with less training data using a QNN. You can train faster. You can solve problems that you cannot solve with a regular neural network. You can do reinforcement learning. There is a lot of different track where we think that there is a potential using variation algorithm and the quantum neural network. But again, there is no real formal proof that it's working, that it will reach an advantage. For me, it's not a big deal. If you think about classical neural network, there is no proof that ChatGPT is working. But practically, ChatGPT is actually working. So you see, it's a bit the same. It's very based on heuristics. So we need to try. We need to try different architecture. And there might be some architecture that will give some advantage at some point, even if we cannot make some nice mathematical proof that it will be working. That's the end of this variation algorithm. So it took me far longer than what I wanted. So I will just make a short break if you see there is a pending question. I don't know. Arnaud, you are managing, I suppose.
There was a few remarks, a question, but I think I answered them. If not, please don't hesitate to ask another question or ping me directly.
So I know that it is a lot to absorb, and you will get access to the Jupyter Notebook for 1 month. So we are keeping the Jupyter Notebook live for 1 month. You have access to GPU credit, so feel free to make some tests on your side. And then I want to start the last part of the class, which is working on the kind of real application. So here we are working on some classification, which is a nice application, but it's very small scale, and we know that it won't scale up because if we had, I don't know, classification between billions of data points, we won't be able to use this approach because we won't be able to train on the network. So I wanted to show you a last application that could be related to something more concrete. So I will start today with the theory side, and tomorrow we'll be working on the implementation side. So let me share my last presentation. Okay. Okay, so this is the very last presentation that is part of this syllabus. We'll be talking about solving shortest path problem with Kubo formulation. So there is multiple things to explain here. First, what is the shortest path problem? What is the Kubo formulation? How do we implement that on the QPU, photonic QPU? So I will go through that part today, and we'll be doing the implementation work tomorrow in the last in the last class. So here's what I will be doing. So definition of Kubo problem, definition of the shortest path problem, mapping shortest path problem in Kubo terms, experimenting that together, and concluding on all of that. So what is Kubo? Kubo is a specific type of problem where the solution are binary variables. Binary variables mean that they can take 0 and 1 only. For instance, it can be a path in a maze where you can go up or left, for instance, and up will be 0, left. So there is no, each of the steps is 0 or 1, and that's only the only value they can take. It's defined, usually it's defined by a matrix. So matrix, and the Kubo formulation is that we want to get the minimum or the maximum, it's just a question of sign, of the transpose of the vector B, the matrix, and the vector B, which is formulated by this right formula, where you see that each of the, so X is the B here. We take the sum of the B, Y, B, J, multiplied by the weight in the matrix prime definition, and we want to optimize that value. So this is a quadratic prime, quadratic function, because we have multiplication of these two terms here. You can easily see that most of the time it will be 0. So to this value to be true, we need to have both x, y, and j that is true for this value to be true. So we are summing basically all the sum of this, all the term of this matrix, but only when both column and row index are true in my program. So this is the mathematical formulation of my problem. And this describes a very wide range of combinatorial optimization problems. So we will see that. So it is a NP-hard class of problem, and one very simple intuition on that in why it is hard. It is hard because the space we are navigating on, the space where B takes value, has a size of 2 power n, m here. So each value can be 0, 1. So basically, each of the possible 0, 1 value for each position is possible. So that makes total number of value combination is 2 power m. So 2 power m is complex. If you take m is 40, we are talking about billions of parameters, of possible values. And there is something that is a bit nasty here, is that we see that it's quite hard there is no continuity. It's not a continuous variable, because when you move from I to I plus 1, there is nothing continuous here, because this is just moving from 0 and 1. So there is no real algorithm that solves that classically. So there is some case where we can define some we can some subcase where you can define some algorithm that finds some optimal solution, but in most cases it is NP-hard so to solve. So the number of variable growth become intractable. So I mentioned that for 40, m equal 40, we are talking about billion. If you take m is I don't know 100, then we are talking about 2 to the power 100. So 2 to the power 10 is about 1000. So that means that we are talking about something like 10 to the power 90. So 10 with 90 zero after. So you see that the number of parameters, the possible solution is totally intractable for classical solvers. And it is also interesting for us, the Cubo, because it's there is some approach that is quantum for Cubo prime. So one thing to make sure that when you think about Cubo, the Q is not for quantum, yeah, it's quadratic. So there is a lot of, we like to use terms with Q when you are manipulating quantum. In that case, it's not the case. It's quadratic binary optimization problem, unconstrained binary optimization problem. So to solve globally a Cubo problem, the approach is we have some input and we want to find the output where B is minimizing the B transpose B QB. And for that, we need to implement a Cubo solver here. And it is what we'll be interested to find on our side. Not something that we can immediately not identify is that B is a bit string. So if you think about a bit string, then it's kind of, it's a bit string. It's exactly what the quantum computer is generating. So there is a natural connection to a qubit representation here. That make us think that we could find some quantum formulation of the prime. To give an example, so let's take an example with where we have 5 students, we have 6 lectures, and you have 2 lectures possible on Monday and Tuesday, and you have so each of the students is giving some preference. For student 1 who would like to attend the lecture 1 and the lecture 6. Student 2 want to attend the lecture 5 and 4. And the optimization problem will be how we can define which lecture is which day. It is the problem is for the course coordinator to define where to which lecture which day. So here we can identify that the lecture days are binary variables. It can be either Monday or Tuesday, so it's 0, 1. So it is where we have our binary variables. It's also black and white. So we can think that as a coloring problem of the two-color coloring problem, color coloring problem. And the problem definition, it's kind of my Q matrix is this preference. So let us see how we can turn that into a quantum Cubo problem. So you have the different lessons, L1, L2 to L6. And then the student 1 has a preference to attend lecture 1 and lecture 5. So we can draw some edge between L1 and L5. The same for L5 and L4, L4 and L2, and so on. This is the different edge. We can see that we were thinking about the coloring problem. So if L1 is, for instance, on the Monday on black, then L5 has to be on the Tuesday. It will be white. So if this is black, this is white. The L5 is black. If L5 is black, then for the same reason, we can say that L4 is black. And then we can continue like that, manually propagate that. Then L2 is black, white, and so on. But this doesn't work completely because at some point we'll get some conditions that are not compatible. So we might not be able to match all the possible wishes, preferences. And for that, we define some value, which is this value 1 minus Ly minus Lj plus 2 Ly Lj. Why we do that? This is defining the preference. And you see that for the students 4, if you want to attend 3 and 5, this will be, and here we are looking at the value that will be 0 or 1, depending on the day. This will be if Ly and Lj are 0, then the value of that is 1. If Ly and Lj are 1, then the value of that will be 1. But if Ly and Lj are different, 0 and 1, then the value of that will be 0. So what is interesting here is that with this formula is minimal if Ly and Lj have a different value. So are either on Monday or on Tuesday. So this defines the preference of a user. And for each student, we can minimize, we need to minimize this value. So we can put that together. So we put the preference of student 1 plus student 2 plus student 3, 4, and 5. This makes this complete value, which is still a quadratic representation. And if we want to optimize the number of the choice for each user, we need to minimize this complete sum, in fact. If we minimize this sum, then we'll have all the students happy if the value is 0, or at least the least number of students unhappy if the number is not 0. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Yes, so this, we can turn that into a matrix Q, and we just take the term. So we don't care about the 5 because the 5 is a constant. So if we want to minimize, we can drop the 5. So -1 because L1 square is -5, -3 because L2 square is -3, and so on. So this is the definition of our problem. You can see that the metric is symmetric here because lecture 1 and lecture 5 are totally symmetric. So we can switch. The problem is defined symmetrically. If we can make a mapping of Monday and Tuesday, then you can just switch and say that every course on the Monday are on Tuesday and every course on Tuesday are on Monday. So the problem is totally symmetric here. So it's the reason. So here, and the question is, how do we find this? So we have really made the formulation of this problem as the Kubo problem. And the idea is how we'll make a variational approach with that. So the idea is that we are taking some generic circuit. So I will go to more detail tomorrow, but we are sending photon in input. I produce some output, and with my output, I would like to map that to bit string. So there is multiple way to do that. So for instance, I can say that if I have a photon in mode n, it is the bit string. It's bit string n. So I will use send photon here, and I can have 0, 1 natively here, looking at my distribution of photon here. So you know that there will be some bunching of different photons. So for some time, there will be 2 photons here. So I can either discard that if I have the ability to discard that, or I can just consider that it's part of my system. And then if I have 2 photons that arrive here, then that means that I have 0 photon here, and that I have 1 photon here. I map 2 photons to 1 photon. I can project this. So this is a possible mapping where we see that we can generate all the bit string here. And we can even generate the 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And in that case, we are dealing with the loss. Your system will be losing some photon. So there will be some case where we can even generate the bit string 0, 0, 0, 0. So it is a possible mapping between Fox space, what you have, and the bit string. So we see that there is other possible mapping, but this one is a possible one. So we, as I mentioned, we possibly account for photon loss and lack of PNR, and we can filter them out or not. We evaluate the function, we update the parameters, and then we resample and we redo the same. So the full process here is very intuitive, and we can code that. So one big question is how we map output, Fox space output into a bit string. And this is one part of the problem that we'll be defining on that. So here I'm giving some examples. So I'm not showing the algorithm, but I'm giving what you expect as an example. So here we know that this is solution, and this is symmetrically the same solution here. Because as I mentioned, we can interchange Monday and Tuesday. It's exactly the same. So this one is a perfect solution. So everybody is class satisfied. And what I expect when I will be running my circuit, I'm expecting that when I'm doing, let's say, 1000 sample, I will have most of my distribution of one simple output. And this directly reads as my solution. So 0, 1, 0, 0, and 0 will be the coloring 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. If you look at the coloring of your graph, it is exactly what you can read here. So you have your solution here. Something super interesting in Kubo is that if it converges, then you actually don't need a lot of sample. In fact, with maybe here we took 1000 sample, but we could have taken 10 sample. And except for some noise, with 10 sample, you should probably get your solution. So you don't even need to make millions of sample at the output. Your full solution will have converged to one single state, which is the solution of the problem you are looking for. So it is one of the reasons Kubo is also very interesting quantumly. You can get the solution in very few samples. So yes, time. We are done on time. Before going, so we'll go through that tomorrow. I will just want to. I will give you a link to a Kubo, to the same problem solving here. That is implemented in PennyLane, and there is a small video online that I will share with you that you can look at. I like this video because it shows you again how you can solve Kubo problem in with PennyLane with a very nice and very neat implementation.
Bon. Est-ce que je peux avoir localisé le lien? Et je vais vraiment bien les voir.
Sorry. Yes. So I give you the link of the video. If you are interested, you can watch this video. It takes few minutes, and by tomorrow, so it will help you understand exactly what is the Kubo problem, and we will and it gives a very nice and neat implementation of Kubo solving problem with PennyLane that I really like. That gives you kind of the global idea, and then tomorrow we'll be looking at how we can solve that ourselves on the photonic circuit. You will see that it's simpler than what it looks like. It's quite simple actually to implement such a circuit. But what will be more interesting from my perspective is not really solving a Kubo problem, but it's solving a real problem, shortest path problem, using Kubo. So it is what we'll be doing tomorrow morning. Start, we define what is shortest path problem. Second, show how we can make mapping between shortest path problem and the Kubo formulation, and then implement both in a single notebook. And it's done for today. So again, I'm sorry, it's very dense, the lesson, but I think it's important that we cover most of that. So we are going through every single class that you have been seeing so far. So here, to understand what you have been doing today, you need to understand the physics, you need to understand the hardware, you need to understand the Perceval, the mapping, the mathematics. So it's kind of wrapping up everything together in this last class.